Okay, what we want to take a look at now is adding a bit of type safety into our Axios requests, because we know what types our API is going to be returning, and it will make our life a lot more convenient by making sure that when we use these API responses, we know what type we're going to get back from our API based on the request that we're making. Now, we know from when we previously used this that our Axios response can take a type parameter, and that will be the type that matches the data property here. But at the moment, we don't have any type safety. And this response body we're going to use for all of our requests, and we're not just going to be getting back activities. So what we need to do is think about making this a generic type of response. And ideally, what we want to be able to do is specify the type here so that we know, for instance, we're going to get a list of activities back from this response, and we would want this to be prevalent all throughout the rest of our request, and what this returns should be a promise of type activity array. So what we need to do is add a generic type for our response body, and the way that we do that is we can, after the equals here, we can specify t for the type, and then we can use this type as the Axios response. So t would be substituted for activity array, for example. And then if we hover over the response data, then we can see that the Axios response now has a type parameter, and our data is going to be of some kind of type. Then what we need to do is deal with the request object as well, and we can use the same technique. We can specify the t for type inside angle brackets, and then we can pass that type to the request. So in this case, the get will specify as a type of t. And then what we can do, and notice what we have done, we already put our type parameter inside our request.get, and if I hover over the list, now we can see that it's going to return a promise of type activity array. And we can also use the same technique for the post as well, and we'll specify the type parameter in the post request. We'll do the same for the puts. We'll add the type parameter and also in the request as well, and also for the delete as well. Specify the type and add the type parameter here. What this means, if we go back and take a look at our app.tsx, then we should find that our response is now a type of activity array. And we can go a step further now, because we know our activities, when we get them back from our API, let's just make sure we haven't broken anything first of all and everything looks fine. And if I go and inspect and we take a look at the network tab, and I just refresh the page one more time, then we can see what we're getting back from our API in the preview here, and we're getting a list of our activities. Now, this date property, what we want to do with this is make sure that we can display this as an actual date inside our editing of an activity, because this is just a string at the moment. But if I go back to our activity form, and let's just open up our activity form, then what we actually want to do is give our date input a type, and we'll set it to the type equal to date. Now, if we go and take a look once again in our browser, what we find is that our date input has now changed to a type of date, but what we've lost is the actual date when we go and view an activity and edit it. Because now we've got the date input, but the date input doesn't understand the formatting of the date we're getting back from our API, as it's returned as an ISO string. But if we go and take a look once again at the network tab, and once again I'll just refresh to get the list of activities in the response, and I open up one of the activities, what we can do, and what the date input will understand, is a date formatted like this, without the time information following it. So what we can do is just take this part of the date, and then at least we'll see that inside our form. It's not our final solution by any stretch of the imagination. We'll still deal with dates a bit later. But for now, just so that we can see something, then we'll split this date into just the date itself rather than the time information, and use that to store it inside our activities so that when we do click on edit, we actually do see the dates inside there. So let's go back to VS Code, and what we can do inside our app.tsx is we can take our response information and update the date property inside the activity before we set our activities. So what we'll do is we'll just add some logic inside here, and we'll just create a separate activities array of type activity array, and we're going to set this equal to an empty array initially. And what we'll do is we'll say response, and then we'll say for each, and for each activity, then we'll say the activity dot date is equal to activity dot date dot splits, and we'll split the text based on the T character, and we'll take the first part of what we're split into here. So this will just be the numbered dates and not include any of the time information, because when we split text in this way, then we're going to take the first part of the array that it creates from the split operation. And then what we'll do is say activities dot push, and we'll push our activity into our new activities array here. And then what we'll do is we'll set our activities to our newly created activities array inside this. So if we go take a look, what we should find, if I just refresh the page again, and we click on view and click on edit, now we can see we've got the date displaying inside our form as well. Like I say, just a temporary solution at the moment so that we can see something. What we also want to do is when we're loading our activities, notice how fast this is. This is not a realistic representation of how fast it's going to be once we publish our application onto the internet. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time for us to pull down the activities from the server wherever it may be in the world. So what we'll do is we'll add some fakery to delay the loading of our activities, and then we can add the elements into our user interface to show that something is happening whilst we're waiting for the activities to display. And we'll take a look at that next.